Hello and welcome to this video tutorial. My name is Ron Vellon, and this particular video is all about completing a great negotiation plan. There's another video which I recommend watching first and taking great notes from, and that video is on the guide which tells you what to include in your plan. So that separate video tutorial will go into detail about all of the things required in the plan. This video takes that information and looks at the negotiation plan template, which needs to be followed really accurately, and then how to complete the template so you end up with a great plan that allows all of your creativity and insight to come through and help you negotiate more effectively. I mean, ultimately, that's what it's for. So let's first look at the template and see where the different components from the guide get written into the plan template itself. So we have the guide here on the left, and I'm going to bring up the first page of the negotiation plan template. And I'm just going to draw the connections here. I'm not going to show you a whole detailed plan yet. Let's just see where things go and how to use the template properly. So to begin, issues and interests. They get written up here in this section. The template follows the exact same flow as the guide. So if you need to come back to what you're supposed to include and check the guide, it's exactly in the same order. So this section you have issues and interests. The template is set up so that you don't have to think about how to structure your plan. So follow the template exactly the way it is. That's including the font, the line spacing, and everything else. So for example, this question here, this section, says issues and interests. Do not delete any of this when you complete your plan. You leave the section in, including the blue writing here. This is a marking grid, which is really important to leave in. So don't touch that part of the template. This you can delete. This is just a description of why this is placed here, why we want to use certain kind of line spacing. The line spacing we use in this document is 1.15, and please leave it as such because it makes it much easier to review and to provide you feedback. What you're going to do is just delete this paragraph, like I said, and you just start writing here. You can see there's a little bit of a space here. I'm just going to erase this part. You'll see in the example how this all works out. You have a one-line space here, which you need to leave. This is for clarity. And this paragraph describes to you where to leave line spaces. So the section of issues would start here. You leave a couple of line spaces between the next section of interests, and then you move on. In the course, we're focusing on substantive and relationship interests only. And every case has both. Substantive will probably be more, but make sure you have both of these interests described. And again, I'll show you in the completed example what that looks like. Then we go to the next section, what we call the key opening data. Key opening data are your target, opening offer, resistance point, and your BATNA. Every case has a BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. You may not like your BATNA, it may not be an effective BATNA, but that's what you've got to deal with. What is the option if your negotiation fails? Again, a line space between each of the subsections within here. The other thing to keep in mind is when you talk about a target or an opening offer or resistance point, you want to make sure you have all elements together. So let's say, for example, you've got price, quantity, maybe there's a quality element that has to be negotiated. You want them all together in your target. So you describe each one, you identify each element, and you explain each one with one simple sentence. Then afterward, you have to explain why you chose these particular numbers, conditions, whatever it is that makes up your target. You need to explain your rationale. And you do the same thing for your opening offer and your resistance point. The BATNA should be self-explanatory. It should be pretty clear, and that doesn't take a lot of explanation. But you do all of these so you have each section crystal clear in front of you in your plan. We don't think in fragments typically. When we go into an agreement and we have a target in mind, it's a holistic picture of whatever the elements are that make up what we're negotiating. So all the issues will have a target associated with it. They'll all have an opening offer related to it, or a counter offer if you're not doing the opening offer, and a resistance point. And each element of that collectively make up the total of the target, resistance point, and opening offer. Again, we'll show you an example. You'll be able to figure it out. Preliminary assessment of your opponent. Now you're doing similar work. Basically, this is educated guessing. So you have to try to see, what do you think your opponent is thinking? It is educated guessing, and you will be wrong 99.9% of the time. But the point is to get you thinking like a chess player, what do I think my opponent will be doing? So as I said, you're doing the same thing here for your opponent, similar to what you did above. So the same detail, explanation, really, really critical. The next part is, what do I know about the other negotiator's negotiation style and personal reputation? So for here, many of the negotiations that we do that are one-on-one, you won't know necessarily in advance who your opponent is. So this is where we talk about your understanding of how your classmate operates, not the person in the case, but your actual classmate opponent. Here, we leave it blank a lot of the time unless I tell you otherwise, because the information isn't available to you. This will be really important when it comes to doing team negotiations, because at that point you will know who your opponent team is. So we just put an NA here, and that covers it, and you'll just get the 2.5 marks here as a gimme. So that's the overview for the first half of the plan and the plan template. This part, in other words, about half your plan, will be about probably 2 to 3 pages, something in that zone, likely closer to 2 pages, depending on the complexity of the case, of course. Just a quick reminder before we go on to the second half of the template and the plan. That is that make sure this is all typed out. You put in all the necessary information here. You won't know the opponent name likely, so just put in not applicable. You don't have that name. Again, follow the font, line spacing that's built in. This includes the size. And keep it professional. Really critical that you keep this clean and that it's proofread. Make sure you proofread your work so it makes sense and things are thoroughly explained. And remember, do not delete the questions. Okay, do not delete these. You do delete this. This is just a location spacer. So you just take that out when you start and you type right from that point. So let's look at the second half. In the second half of the plan, we come to the 2 most important sections of the whole plan. It doesn't mean that the issues and interests are not important, but this is where most of the mistakes are made typically, because people aren't careful and they're not thorough and they really don't think things out fully or explain them properly. So please pay attention to this. First one is, what are your competitive advantages? Here in the plan template, things are spelled out for you, so please make sure that you read this carefully. So it's asking, what are your competitive advantages in the negotiation? This is not about your marketplace or your competitive position or anything like that. This is about your competitive advantages in the negotiation. So yes, if you have a competitive position in the marketplace, or you're the market leader, or you have a certain patent or an exclusivity, that's great in the marketplace. But how does that translate into a competitive advantage in the negotiation? So I have here in blue, which you also do not delete, keep that in the plan when you complete it. Make sure you explain each one, what the specific advantage is and how you expect it to help you during the negotiation. So please be sure to pay attention to that. It's really going to help you think about how you're entering the negotiation, what kind of advantages you might have. But you have to really put it into, how do I think about this negotiation? Not just generally. If you do, you'll end up with a very low mark because it is of no value until you translate it into some kind of way of being or an attitude or a perspective. This has to be incorporated, and it has to include some element of how you're going to apply this advantage. What is it that each of the advantages will help you do? Each one will need at least one paragraph, and definitely put a line space between those two paragraphs. Typically, there are at least two in each case, but there might only be one. And then the biggest question are your proposed strategies and any bargaining tactics you intend to employ. In the guide, it gets a little bit more clarified in the plan. So to be very clear here, your proposed strategies and tactics you intend to employ, you want to have a primary strategy and the tactics that go along with them, then the backup strategy and the tactics that go along with that. The reality is your plan will not work perfectly, but for the sake of the discipline of planning, one main strategy, minimum two tactics that go with it to support it. Then a backup strategy and two tactics that support the backup strategy. In reality, when you start negotiating, you may find yourself grabbing your backup tactic and using it with your primary strategy, and it gets all messy. That's fine. That's normal. But the planning part is getting you to think strategically and think of the right tactics you want to try. And then you have your backup there if those first primary ones don't work. And again, read the part in blue. Briefly explain each strategy and tactic, what each looks like to you in the specific case, as well as how you will implement each strategy and tactic. Do not write definitions. They are of no value. You want to describe the strategy or tactic and then talk about how you will implement or apply each one. This is a big section. Sometimes it takes 2/3 of a page. I've seen sections like this take a whole page, actually. Whatever it is, it has to be really complete. And then we get to the simplest part of the plan. You'll cruise through this because we want to respect process and give you a sense of as much process as we can, even though it's a simulation and we're in classes and so on. So here we have, who are the important constituencies or stakeholders to whom I am accountable? So think about your case, read through it, and think about, who am I accountable to? Who's my boss? Are there shareholders that are mentioned in the case? Are there owners? Do we have partners in what we're doing? What's going on? There are accountabilities, and you want to just mention those and briefly explain them. What do I need to assemble? Basically, you need to bring your plan. And if you decide to use a negotiation sheet, which is explained elsewhere, just as a little short version of your plan, you bring that, any other things you might want to bring with you, coffee or whatever. Just something simple. When you're in real negotiations in the real world, they can often be very complex. You may talk about, who do I need to bring? Do I need to bring other parties? Do I need to bring lawyers? Whatever it is, what documentation do I need? Are there contracts involved? This is where this section comes into play. And the last one is, what protocol is important for this negotiation? In other words, where are we negotiating and so on? For the sake of this course, it's simply we're meeting in the classroom, etc. So these are very simple sections to do. In total, they're only worth 7.5 marks, but they are important. So don't ignore them. So that basically shows you where everything plugs in here. Now what we're going to do is shift over and look at an example of an A or even A+ level, one might consider, a plan that was really, really well done by a previous student, and a case that you won't be doing because it fleshes out the case pretty clearly. But to show you the level of work we're looking for. It's not killer work. It's just very well thought out, and it's been proofread. It makes sense. So this is kind of what we're aiming for. So let me just take a pause here, and I'm going to bring up the plan example. So here's page 1 of the example, and this is for a case that involved a cruise line, and you were the mayor of this island. It doesn't really matter. We don't have to get into that detail. And your opponent was the captain of a cruise line. So that was kind of the quick setup. We don't have an opponent name here because, as I told you before, they didn't know who the opponent was, so they left it blank, which is what you should do unless you do know who your opponent is. I've taken out the student name and the RID and section number and all that stuff, so that's because it's confidential. So make sure you complete these. Normally you should have that there. You always put in the role you have in the case. That will be clear. Every case will give you a title for your role in it. So if we move up ahead here a little bit, we start to see what these sections look like when they're completed. So here they have an excellent job done here where they have, first of all, the issues to be negotiated. So we look at the issues to be negotiated. We can see how clearly they're spelled out. Issues, each one separate little bullet point. Okay, just like that, briefly explained. Number of cruise visits per year, which was part of the case, the length of each visit, number of days, number of tourists disembarking at the tropical island each day. All these things had to be worked out. And even overall, they had an agreement with the captain that will be approved by the island regarding da-da-da. So even the idea that they're negotiating an overall agreement, they happen to put that in, which is great, very complete. Each is clear, and the explanation is easy to track. Notice, and this is an important little flag, there is no target data or resistance point, etc. Okay? This is not the place for numbers. Numbers go later when you actually discuss your target point. So do not include key data. That's below. Many students make that error and they put it in here and it gets very confusing. Okay, so don't do that. Below this, we have the substantive interests, which are the main interests around the outcome of the case itself. So the actual interest in the length of each visit, number of tourists, number of cruise visits, and all that. That's what the substantive interests are. It's the interests in the material elements of the case. So they're all spelled out here very clearly. They're only 1 or 2 lines long each. Notice very straightforward line spacing, nice, clean formatting. It looks really professional. And we want to make sure that yours looks professional too. It will affect the mark you get because it's a lot easier to read this way. And if it's hard to read, it makes it difficult to understand what you're trying to communicate. So formatting matters. And then the other section here is on relationship interests. So if you're doing a distributive case, this is going to be very thin. This happens to be an example of an integrative case. So it's going to have more relationship kinds of information in there. It's going to also affect the kinds of strategies and tactics that are being used. I just want to be clear here. So the relationship element in a distributive case will be thin. This will have less information simply because the relationship is not as important. However, the relationship needs to be discussed in some way, even if it's a very thin thing. It's a one-time transaction, whatever it is. Okay. Just going to scroll up a little bit here. Get this out of the way. Key opening data. So this is the first page, and this continues on the next page, which we're going to show you in a second. Again, formatting, super clean. All these bullets are lined up here. First thing we discuss is the target point. Please do this in order. So what they do is all elements are together in one big target point. It's one package. And this is the same for all your cases. All the elements of a target need to be together. Then, good, clear explanation that discusses why you've chosen those specific numbers or conditions for your target. Here, this is just a description of each one. This tells us why you chose them. I'm going to put in numbers and quotation marks here because often it's not numbers alone. So please make sure this section is really clear and clean as well. Now let's take a look at page 2. Here on page 2, we're continuing with the section. We have the resistance point, opening offer, and BATNA. For the sake of flow, I just want to add a little thing that becomes troublesome. Don't break up subsections. So this is a subsection. Don't break it up across a page, because it gets confusing to read. Just move on to the next page and start it at the top. Because if you split a subsection at the bottom with the top, you're going to have to flip back and forth to see what you're really talking about. It's just much cleaner. So you do one part of this, the resistance point. Again, you're going to have similar parts, 3 different parts to your resistance point as you do with your target, with different numbers and conditions, of course. Again, good explanation here. This is really important, explaining your rationale. Same thing with your opening offer. This can also be a counter offer, depending on how you see it. Just treat it as opening offer in your plan, though. That's fine. Again, great explanations. Really important to this. And then finally, your BATNA. And the BATNA in this case has the same 3 kind of elements as you do in the issues, because there is an alternative that is viable. Sometimes your BATNA doesn't have it because your BATNA is to simply walk away and have no deal. That's the way life is sometimes. In the simulations you work with in the course, you will have a BATNA in almost all cases that will be fairly easy to articulate. So in this case, the BATNA happens to be another island to go to that's not as nice, but it's a backup. And again, there's a brief explanation here that's really important to include, just as long as we understand that you understand. Moving down, we get to the next section, which is, I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, your preliminary assessment of your opponent. Again, we're doing the same kind of work, but from the point of view of your opponent. So your case is going to give you limited information about your opponent, but that's what you have to work with. Same idea, clean, really clear structure, great writing. So if you're not confident in your writing, just take extra time to proofread and you're going to be fine. So again, the target points, this should say target point, but that's really a small grammar thing. Okay, all the elements are there. This student is guessing now. They're trying to figure out, what is my opponent going to start with? What's their target point? And of course, there's an explanation as to why they feel this will be the target of their opponent. Resistance point, same treatment. Clear, and then of course, explanation. You're noticing a pretty clear pattern here, I hope. We're looking for great professionalism. We're not looking for perfect. So yes, we're looking for excellence. We're looking for clarity and a good professional document that anyone could read and really get where you're coming from. We arrive at the 3rd page of the plan, and we can see they continue. They didn't break the subsection. It's really clean and easy to follow. And once again, great formatting, good clarity, their possible interests. Now for you, your interests are right at the top. They're right below the issues. In this case, for the picture of our opponent, we're putting them into the section just below the other data points. So we have their interests in here. This person chose to put it in this place. Below that, we have their offer, what we think their offer is going to be, or counter offer, whatever their case may be. Again, clear bullet points here, good explanation here. The interests are described in a clear explanation for each one as they relate to the different issues in the negotiation. We don't separate here substantive and relationship. Just keep it simple. I mean, you can if you want, but we don't expect that level of complexity for this plan or any plan. Then we come to 2 sections that we haven't seen before, their perceived strengths and their perceived weaknesses. Now, where possible, you want to try to put the strength into the context of the negotiation. So make sure these are relevant to the negotiation. Remember, the plan is not perfect. It's excellent. So there's going to be little flaws in there or whatever, but the overall plan is really, really well done and thorough. Perceived weaknesses. Again, your perception of what their weaknesses will be, each one clearly articulated. Just make sure they're clear. What do I know about the other negotiators' negotiation style and personal reputation? Here we have NA. That's all you have to do. The 2.5 marks, as I said before, are a gimme. It's a freebie, except for when you do a team negotiation. You'll be reminded of that when it comes around. If we scroll up a little bit, this very important question I mentioned before, where a lot of mistakes are made typically, your anticipated competitive advantages in the negotiation. So make sure, I'm just going to erase this part here. make sure, please, that I'm going to put this in red, make sure you explain each one, what the specific advantage is and how you expect it to help you during the negotiation. And there's some examples here you can scroll through and read. But make sure, please, it's always about the context of actually negotiating. So take the bigger advantage, whatever you think it is, but what does that translate into in terms of helping you in the negotiation? Let's go on to the next page. Now we arrive at the biggest, at least the most mark-valued question, your proposed strategies and tactics. Again, read that blue part. It's there as a support for you. Briefly explain each strategy and tactic, what each looks like to you in the specific case, as well as how you will implement each strategy and tactic. So in this case, this is an integrative case. So the strategies and tactics used here will not apply to a distributive case. So please be careful about that, because if you borrow some of this stuff and use it in the wrong case, or I don't need to mention plagiarism, I hope, you will get yourself into difficulty. In this case, they've got their main strategy here. Okay, that's their primary strategy. And to support it, the recommendation is, and the requirement really is to have two tactics. So here they have two tactics. Okay, this is all the primary piece. This is what we call the primary. Keep your primary strategy and your tactics together. As we scroll up, is your backup. So if your initial strategy does not work, your backup strategy will be what? So here we have the backup strategy and a description of how this applies to the case and how it's going to be implemented. So again, I want to remind you, don't bother with definitions. Textbook definitions have no value in a plan, and you will lose marks. Then we have two backup tactics. And it's really important, again, to have your backup strategy and your tactics together. I'm not going to go through the language of these. On the video, you can stop the video and read through it. Be careful that you don't end up borrowing language that does not belong to you. But this shows you the kind of detail we're looking for and the clarity that we're expecting. And here we get to the last page. This is the easy peasy part, but it is important, so don't blow it off. First, we have who are the important constituencies, stakeholders, and so on, to whom you are accountable. So in the case, you will be representing a company or an organization of some sort. Who are you accountable to? Explain. Again, you can see it's very brief. What do I need to assemble? Very brief. And what protocol is important? Again, this person says we'll be negotiating in a normal classroom during regular hours. No other details needed. I just want you to get into the habit. So that's an easy 7.5 marks out of 100. Do not delete. I'm going to remind you one more time. Do not delete anything. Just put your answers below. So again, do not delete any part of the template other than the X's where you start writing. They're just indicators. But do not remove anything else. And this means do not alter the template either. So that's it. That's the example of what an A plan looks like and what you should be aiming for. If you do a great plan, you'll probably find that the value, as many people know, is in the planning, not so much in the finished plan itself, because you'll have the plan in front of you, but the thinking that happens by creating a plan will become embedded in you. So yes, the plan is important. I don't want to diminish the plan, but it's the planning, the action of actually creating the plan that has the greatest value. So I wish you great success in creating your plan. Make sure it's written in your own way, in your own words, but make sure that you proofread, make sure it's clear, formatting is clear and clean, and that you treat it as a professional document that you could show to anybody. Good luck.